Okay, so this video is also long overdue, but I'm already on solo trip number 4. Jesus. So I'm not going to be editing this video. Bear with me. But I did want to tell you about my solo trip number 2. So solo trip number 2 was to Costa Rica. That was for my 20th birthday, I believe. I think did I turn 20? No, it was for my 21st birthday. My 20th birthday, I spent in Florida. It was for COVID. So my 21st birthday, I decided that I wanted to go to Costa Rica. And at the time, it was still over the pandemic and everything. So everybody was like really heading over to Mexico. Everyone was kind of like going to Tulum and everything. So I kind of didn't really want to do that because that's what everybody else was doing. And I kind of wanted to be my own person. So I looked up and compared the prices for different countries, and I found out that Costa Rica was way cheaper than Mexico. So I was like, all right, like I'll give it a shot. And I saw that Costa Rica was like a pretty good place for Black travelers, especially like solo female Black travelers. So I was like, okay. I went on Airbnb and I just kind of had like this vision in my mind about the type of Airbnb that I wanted to stay in. It wasn't necessarily like the country or the city, or it was really just like the B&B that I wanted to stay in. And then I finally found it in this place called Uvita, Costa Rica. And I decided, okay, like I'm just gonna do it. I'm just gonna go. So I booked the ticket and I go. I get there, and I did see a lot of Afro-Latinas and Afro-Latinos when I was out there, which made me pretty comfortable, just like off rip, because I mean, I studied Spanish for a while when I was in school from like the 7th grade to like junior year. So I was actually pretty good at it, had a knack for it, and like with the language barrier as well as like the cultural and racial barriers and stuff like that, I felt a lot more comfortable. So I get there, I land. At the time, it was during the pandemic, so their economy had collapsed, and basically the middle class had dissolved. So it was just the lower class and the upper class. And so everybody in the middle class was kind of just taking on a bunch of odd jobs in order to try and make more money, kind of like what we're going through in America right now. So when I first left the airport, I was kind of like bombarded with a lot of people that were trying to do taxis. It was probably like 25 people that were just trying to pick people up from the taxi or from the airport. So considering that it was my first solo travel outside of the country, I'd gone to Puerto Rico previously, and this was my first like out of the country. Puerto Rico was kind of just like dipping my toes in it, but a lot of people spoke English for the most part. Costa Rica, it was primarily Spanish. So I was like, okay. And I decided that I was gonna slip into a cafe at the airport, and I called an Uber. Now, I get my Uber, and he sees that Uvita, my Airbnb, was actually like 4 hours away. Didn't know that. Did not know that. But we were just like, okay, whatever. Like the currency difference in America was so different versus Costa Rica. I think just the 7-minute drive from my house in Queens to the airport was $20, and the 4-hour drive from the airport in Costa Rica to Uvita, my puppy is drinking his water. I'm so sorry if you can hear that. But that was about $100 in US dollars. So I was like, okay, let's do it. So when I travel, for the most part, I travel with like a pocket knife, I travel with a taser, and I travel with like a door jammer. And I've recently just started traveling with my dog. And I kind of just like, when I'm in an Uber, I prefer to sit directly behind the driver so that if anything happens, like they can't reach behind me and like reach back here. So like I just like to have them in my in my view. And I would sit with kind of just like, you know, like my pocket knife in my pockets, or I would sit with my taser underneath my leg and whatever. And we kind of just started chatting. His name was Andreas, and you know, he was asking me where I was from. And I told him, you know, I was from New York, and he told me, oh, like his wife lives in New York. And I was like, oh, no way. And so he's like, yeah, and he's telling me his wife works for a company in New York and so on and so forth. And he's asking me, you know, is this my first time in Costa Rica? And I was like, no, that my uncles live here with my grandmother and things like that. Not true. But I kind of just like keep this story for whenever I travel. And he was like, okay. And so I told him it was my first time in Uvita though. And so he was just like, okay, well, let's drive. And I have a couple of spots that I want to show you that are kind of like along the way, since it's 4 hours anyway. So I was like, okay. And we ended up driving, and at one point he like pulls off the side of the road, and I'm like, oh, absolutely not. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And he's like, oh, I want to show you something. I'm like, okay. And so he wants me to get out of the car, and he takes me to this like cliff, and it has like the most beautiful view that I've ever seen in my entire life of like this beach below. And they were like, it was like a really popular view too. There just weren't many people there. And they were like selling drinks and stuff. So I have a picture there too. If I can find it, if you guys really want to see it. He took my picture, and I was like, and it was just like a beautiful little spot. And so we keep driving. I think this was probably like 2 hours in. And then his wife calls him. And he like shows me his wife, like they're on FaceTime and whatever, and he's like, yeah, like she's from New York too. So I'm talking to her, and she's like, you know, I hope that you gave him the right address. It's like 4 hours away. And I was like, you and me both, lady. So we're driving, and we keep going, and it just starts like raining as we get closer and closer to the destination. So now I'm kind of like, okay. This is different. So it's raining because Costa Rica is kind of like a rainforesty. The thing I loved about Costa Rica was that it was like rainforesty, but also kind of like mountainous, but also like beachy, like all at the same time. And so it started to rain, and at the time I had my comfy sweater. I don't know if you guys know that. It's like almost like a Snuggie, but instead of it being like all the way down to your feet, it like is a hoodie. So it's giant though, and that's all that I had. I didn't have an umbrella. So I put that on, and then we get to the address, and it's a construction site. And it's raining, and I basically just start hyperventilating because I'm like, you gotta be freaking kidding me. And I'm just kind of like looking at him, and I'm just kind of like, okay, Andreas, like, please don't leave me. I didn't have service either. I had called my my phone company prior to this, and I had tried to arrange it for service, and it just didn't work. So I was like, okay, I don't really know what I'm gonna do right now. But he was like super nice, and he was like, okay, like let's ask some people, let's ask the people of the town if they know what it's called. And so we drove around for a while, and nobody knew. So before I had even gotten, I think when I was at the airport, I took screenshots of the directions because I was underneath the impression that once I got to Costa Rica that I was going to be renting a car, but you had to be 21, and I was 20. So I remember I was at the airport, and I was like, I turned 20 tomorrow. And they were like, then come back tomorrow, which is how I ended up with Andreas. So I had these instructions, and I'm showing him, and I'm like, okay, these are the streets that, you know, it was supposed to be on. These are the directions and whatever. And so he starts to go, right? And it's still raining. So we're going, and we're like driving up the side of this mountain, and he's in like a compact car. I don't remember what it was. Maybe it was like a Toyota or like a Honda or something like that. And it was kind of like compact. It wasn't an SUV. And we're going up this mountain, and we start, and he's like, he looks back at me and he's like, I don't think that my car's gonna make it. And I'm like, what do you mean you don't think your car's gonna make it? And he's like, you know, the car was very low, and there was rain and it was mud and we were going up this mountain, and so he was trying to explain to me that he didn't think that his car was gonna make it up the mountain. So I'm like, all right. And so he's like, I think he said that it was like 1.7 kilometers or like 2.7 kilometers away. And I was at this point, I just started like, I was like ready. I was ready to cry. I was like, I'm American. I don't know how far kilometers are. And he kind of took pity on me and he just kept going. So we're going up this mountain, right? And I'm in the backseat, like, in tears. He's sitting there, like, okay, like, we're gonna try it. And so we're going. And we make it up. We, like, pass a building, and we're making it up the side of this mountain. And then the car gets stuck. It was like a movie. Like, the wheels were turning, but the car was not moving. It was like stuck in the mud on the side of this mountain while it's raining. And so Andreas is like trying to get he's trying to do like a 3-pointer to try and get out of it, but his car is not moving. And he's also 4 hours away from his house. Mind you, I'm in a whole other country, so I'm having a bigger panic attack, but he's trying to figure out how he's gonna get back home, and his car is stuck. So he tells me, like, okay, go to that building that we just passed and ask them if they, like, show them a picture of your Airbnb and ask them if they know where it is. And so I get out the car in my giant comfy hoodie, and it's raining, and so I'm walking down to this building, and as I'm walking down, I see this pickup truck coming up the mountain. It was a black pickup truck, and I just start waving this pickup truck in the rain and in my hoodie, and I'm just like waving at him like we're in a movie. And so this guy comes up, and it has a taxi sign on the top, and so he comes up and he like rolls down his window, and he's eating an ice cream. He's eating one of those strawberry, I don't even know what you call them, and they have like the little crumbles on it. He's eating one of those, and I'm like in tears, and he is eating an ice cream cone. So I'm like, okay, let me calm down. And so I explain to him what's going on, and I show him where Andreas is. So he goes, and he drives up to where Andreas is, and Andreas has gotten the car to kind of like turn around at this point, right? And so Andreas kind of like talks to him. He's talking to Andreas. I'm like picking up bits and pieces, but like they're talking like pretty fast. Like I can figure out Spanish for the most part, but like if it's fast and if it's between two other people and not towards me, then it's a little bit hard. So Andreas kind of like looks at me and he's like, okay. And then he looks at me and he goes, he's gonna take you the rest of the way. And he looks at me and he's like, be careful. And I'm like, okay. And so I take my stuff out of the back and I get into the back of the pickup truck again. And I'm sitting like directly behind him, and I got like my taser underneath my leg and whatever. And the guy like turns and he looks at me and he's like, I know that guy. And I'm like, Andreas? And he's like, yeah. He was, turns out that Andreas was one of the soccer players for the national Costa Rican soccer team. And he was famous, I guess. And so that's how I ended up in this guy's pickup truck, literally just because he ended up being famous and he was like starstruck by Andreas. And I can't believe, Andreas, if you do see this, I cannot believe that you drove 4 hours with me and you did not tell me that. Anyway, so we're driving up the mountain and we're trying to find the spot. I'm showing him pictures. I don't have service. We're driving up a literal mountain. There's like Airbnbs like all enclosed into the side of this mountain or whatever, but I cannot find mine. And he gets a call. And he gets a call and he's a taxi. And so he's like, okay, well, I'm gonna go pick them up. And I was like, okay. And so I'm sitting in the bus, so I get up from the back seat and I move to the passenger seat, and we stop by this restaurant on the side of this mountain, and he ends up picking up these two Americans. And I'm like, oh, hey. And this couple in particular was a gay guy and a woman. So a lot of the time when people don't want to solo travel, especially if they're gay men or if they're women, they will pair up together. So this was the first time that I'd ever seen one of those. And I'm like, you know, in the passenger seat hyperventilating. And so they're kind of like, what's going on? Like, we're all Americans and we're kind of just like, what's going on? And so I'm explaining to them, like, I can't find my Airbnb. And so they tell the guy, they're like, no, you need to take her to her Airbnb first, because that's kind of like the worst thing that can happen to a person when they're traveling. Like, make sure that she finds a spot first. So we're all four of us are in this pickup truck, driving around this mountain, trying to find my B&B through just the pictures that I have on my phone. And we're just driving. And then eventually we end up stumbling upon it because I was just showing them the picture, and it turns out that it was a resort. It didn't say that on the Airbnb listing. It turns out that it was. So I think it was called Via Colibri. And so once we said like Via Colibri, that's when everybody was like, oh, why didn't you just say that? And I was like, I didn't know. I thought I was just going to a house. And so we end up going, and it ends up being this like resort. It was like 3 houses, right? And then there were also some tents, like big tents that were also on Airbnb. And then they also had a yoga pavilion, and they also had a restaurant as well, like on the premises. And then they also had like a little house that like the staff lived in. And they had a pool, and they had a private river that ran in the back. It was owned by this guy named Steve, who also lived in Florida, which I was like, oh my God, because I'm originally from Florida. So I was like, this is the weirdest experience. And I go there, and it starts to get dark. And now I'm kind of just sitting there, and the manager finally finds me, and I'm kind of freaking out. I'm trying to like check in and everything, and so the manager's kind of like taking pity on me. And so he's like, okay, he walks me to my hut that I had. It was a honeymoon hut, but it was just me because it's my birthday. And I kind of just like told them that it was that I was waiting for my boyfriend to come, and that like I was hoping that he was gonna propose and blah 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 blah. Not true. But that was just kind of like the story that I went with, and I ended up having the most amazing time. There are pictures on my Instagram, but the first night, I usually, when I travel, like I've been kind of reliant on Uber Eats, and when I got there, there was no Uber Eats. He kind of just laughed at me, and I was like, okay. And so he called his friend, and his friend took me to the town below the mountain, and his friend was kind of like a surfer who would surf at the beach next to the mountain that I was staying at. And so they took me to this pizza spot, and so I went and I got pizza, and they took pity on me, and then they took me back home. And then I went back, and you know, there was like a jacuzzi. I did a coconut milk bath with like these herbs that I got from Flower Power in New York City. And Steve, the owner, had like his 2 dogs. I think they were named Sol and Luna, so sun and moon. And they kind of just like lived on the property out there. And the manager ended up being like super cool. He was also a chef in his pastime. So for my birthday, found out that it was my birthday, and he ended up getting one of his friends that was a local fisherman to catch me some of their local fish and some shrimp. And at the time, I was kind of like on a vegan diet, not as much anymore, but he made me like this heart of palm salad, and they got me their local beer that was called La Rosa, and it had like a ram on it, and I thought that was so amazing because I'm an Aries and our sign is a ram, so I still have it. And we ended up eating and just like talking about politics, because at the time Trump was still in office, and it was just like really interesting having the perspective of like what other countries see us as Americans. And he actually felt bad for us at that point in time, and that's what really jump-started a lot of things for me. That's when I came back from that trip, is when I started with a lot more of like my political activism and like protesting in New York and things like that. So that entire experience like really opened up my eyes, and yeah. I have more pictures on my Instagram. I'm not as tech savvy as I would like to be, but I do just want to like get these videos out there. So if you stuck around till the end, thank you. Oh, there is one more part. So when I was out there, I met 3 ladies, right? So I went down to the river, and there were these 2 women that were there. I'm not exactly sure what country they were from, but they were Hispanic. And they were in the river, and I was like entranced by them because I had never been in a river before. I grew up in Florida, so I've been in, you know, pools, the ocean, not a river, different vibe. And I was like, oh my God, they're so brave. And so they were like, no, you're so brave. Like, you're out here by yourself. And so one of the ladies that was in the river, she didn't speak English, so we were kind of like translating between her friend. And she was telling me that she was an older woman. I would say she's probably like in her 50s. Maybe like mid-50s, early 60s. And she said that she just travels throughout the world. She was like, yeah, that's what my friend does. Like, she's been to Thailand, she's been to Costa Rica, like she's been to England. Like, she just does the same thing. Like, she just goes by herself. And that was really cool, because it was kind of like, oh my God, like I met another solo female traveler, even though at this point in time she was not solo. And then on my last day when I was leaving, I met this other woman. I was eating my pancakes and I had all my bags, and I was getting ready for the initial friend. He was going to drive me back to the airport 4 hours away. And she saw me with my bags, and she had noticed me there for a while, and she was like, are you here by yourself? And so it was my last day, and whenever I see women, like when I'm traveling, I'm like, yeah, I'm by myself. Men, not so much, but when it comes to women, I'm like, yeah. And she was like, that's awesome. She was like, you look so young, like it's good that you started early. And she was telling me her story too, because she was also a solo female traveler. She was from either Switzerland or Sweden. And she was telling me that, like, her story of how she started to become a solo female traveler. And she had a really bad breakup when she was like 30. And she decided that her first trip that she ever wanted to go to was America. And I was like, why would you want to go to us? But she was like, yeah, like I want to go to America. So she went to America, she went to Cali, and she ended up driving, I think, from like the bottom of Cali all the way to Oregon. And she said it was like the most beautiful experience that she'd ever had, and like she didn't really like drive like that before, and at the time like I wasn't really driving either. And she said that it was like amazing. And so I asked her, like, what does she do? She said that she runs her own company online through her laptop, and she just travels the world. So I was like, okay, that's pretty awesome. And I asked her, you know, if she has any advice. And she just told me, like, what countries to stay away from as a solo female traveler. So she told me, in her experience, not to go to certain parts of Africa alone, and not to go to certain parts of the Middle East alone as a solo female traveler. So I was like, okay. And she just told me to keep going. And yeah, so ever since, here I am. So if you stuck around till the end, thank you so much. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. You can follow me on Instagram if you want to see a lot more of my like photo dumps from the time when I was there. And yeah, Andreas, if you see this, say what's up. But yeah, I'll also like link the Airbnb that I stayed at down below too. It was amazing. It was the most beautiful thing, like especially living in New York. I hadn't seen stars for such a long time, and the stars were so intense out there because I was up in a mountain. It was like, it was beautiful. So I highly recommend it in case anybody ever wants to stay, but I'll drop that down below, and you can spot my socials down too. So thanks for watching.